Okay, good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
Today is Monday, June 23rd, and I think the big question on everybody's mind is after this bombing, are we at war with Iran? How do you just assess the situation with where the United States is right now in this conflict?
Yeah. Well, I think J.D. Vance has already answered that question. He said that we're not at war with Iran. We did not attack Iran. We just attacked their nuclear program. That's okay. That seems to be the official line. Of course, Trump always has trouble sticking to any line. So every once in a while, there's just threats to overthrow the regime, to make Iran great again. If they don't do it, we'll do it for them. Right? We have that the threatened regime change. But in general, I think that that's the official line that we're okay. This was a one-off thing. Like I was saying, if Trump can pull this off and he can just go in, drop a few bombs, come back without any losses, and it appears that that's what he did. It'll be considered a success, and I don't even think it'll hurt him with his base. With the exception of a rather small minority of very principled people. Like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is quite upset about this. But a lot of people think that it's great. But of course, the Iranians have a say in this, and they have threatened to retaliate. And if they do, then we're at war with Iran. We've talked about all the targets that they could go against, which actually targets that would be much easier for them to hit than targets within Israel, because American assets are closer to Iran than Israel is, and they can use their, short range and medium range missiles and drones, which are more accurate than their long range ballistic missiles, and are just, I assume, nobody really knows, but I assume that they have more of them. In any case, it'll be easier to move around and so on and so forth. So it's something they clearly could do. Now, the U.S. and U.S. government administration, in anticipation of such a retaliation, is threatened. If you retaliate, then you're going to pay a huge price. Again, that's what Trump said in his ridiculous speech that he gave after the bombing of the nuclear facilities.
It seems to me the move for the Iranians is to actually not strike back at U.S. military targets. I think there's probably, they may want to do it, but they should focus their attention probably on Israel, right? Because if they just continue, Israel's the one that started this. Israel is the root of this whole conflict at the end of the day. So if they continue to strike Israel and don't strike any U.S. military targets, is it possible for the Trump administration to say that this was a one and done? We accomplished our mission. Trump said they obliterated everything, which we can get into later. But
right,
what do you think?
Yeah, no, it is possible. That's my own feeling. This is a decision, of course, that Iran is going to make, and it's a decision that we don't have the authority to make. But it seems to me that bringing the U.S. into this conflict is certainly not to Iran's advantage. Okay, the U.S. did this. I think it first has to be pointed out. This has zero effect on the war with Israel right now. It's not like there are any military assets in those places, so it has zero effect as far as that goes. And if they can keep up this war of attrition, this is a war that they can win. Now, of course, the risk is okay. Well, but they have to do something at least symbolic, and so maybe they'll do something similar to what they've done in the past. Again, we had Operation True Promise 1 and Operation True Promise 2. They were demonstrative. We also had the attack on the military base after the assassination of Soleimani, if you recall. And that was, again, demonstrative. They were showing, look, this is what we can do to your base. But they let the Americans know ahead of time. So the Americans were in their bunkers. The soldiers were, when the missiles hit. But they hit them with great precision. And it may be something similar, something like that. That's kind of just symbolic, saying, look what we can do. But short of eliciting, a heavy response from the U.S. Because yeah, it just seems like the logic is there's just no advantage to them if the U.S. it joins in and starts pummeling them the same way that Israel is. Again, they can do a great deal of damage to the U.S. In a way, they can do more damage to the U.S. than they can to Israel. But it would be a diversion of a distraction from, I think, as you point out, the real war is between them and Israel. And I think they would prefer to keep it that way.
Do you think it's even necessary for Iran to do something symbolic or demonstrative? Because I think, the Zionist Israel and the Trump administration may just use any excuse possible to play it up and say that Iran has attacked us. And I think everybody in Iran knows what's going on here, that the root of the problem here is Israel and the United States is being dragged in. We don't want to do anything, even if it's symbolic, to drag in the United States.
Yeah, well, it's not clear that the U.S. is going to use any excuse to become involved.
Well, I think Netanyahu's going to use any excuse.
Yeah. Well, I think that's true. Yeah. Well, they can say we'll do a time of our choosing or whatever, but it may be far in the future, like True Promise 3 proved to be, right? Yeah, they've made the statement that we definitely will retaliate. So there is sort of an expectation that they have to do something, and they may feel that they have to do something. Now, there's also been talk about, of course, closing the Strait of Hormuz. But that seems to me that's sort of their Samson option or nuclear option. I think, that they would want to reserve that for, later if they really find their backs against the wall or something. I may be wrong about that. One problem with that is that it makes enemies of, let's say, all the Gulf states. Now, the Gulf states, they have been sitting on the fence. In the past, they've been, openly anti-Iranian. I think now it's clear that they're cooperating to some extent with the U.S. and Israel, but not as openly, and they're trying their best to stay out of it. None of these attacks were launched actually from those bases. Well, I shouldn't say none of these attacks. This most recent attacks was not launched. None of the aircraft, took off from any of those bases in the Persian Gulf. Not in the Persian Gulf, but rather, in the Persian Gulf. Yeah, right. I'm sorry. And they would like to just stay out of it. And I think that, at the present, Iran, I think is garnering a lot of sympathy. They might lose some of it if it closes the Strait of Hormuz. I'm just, speculating, because that's a real blow to all those countries, including Iraq. A huge blow to them, to their economies. And I think they really don't want to see that happen. So I think, either they're going to do nothing or it's going to be symbolic, I would think, against the U.S., but they are going to continue, and they have continued, since the B-2 bombing strike. They have launched two, significant, let's say, waves of attacks against Israel, and have done more significant damage. We don't know how much, but clearly some significant damage. Again, there's very strict military censorship in Israel, so we don't know the full extent of it. And that I think they'll probably stay the course.
With the talking about the Strait of Hormuz potentially being closed, I heard, I don't know if this is possible. Is it possible that Iran could do something like selective in what ships can pass through, and if they're bound for Iranian friendly states like China, then it's no problem. But if they're bound for the West, then they wouldn't let that in. Is that possible, or is it, because we've kind of talked about Strait of Hormuz is just like it gets shut down, but can it be something like what the Houthis were doing?
Well, I think it would be possible. Again, that's what the Houthis have been doing in the Red Sea. They've been targeting Israeli-linked shipping, and Russian and Chinese ships and other ships have had free passage. So that is a possibility. Sure, that might make sense. Maybe they could do it. We'll see.
Do you think it's possible that what we did here, we're trying to market it as a one and done, some huge military achievement that the U.S. pulled off, and all mission accomplished, and we can go home and call it a day? Is that possible? Do you think we can really achieve that?
You can't say it's impossible. Interestingly, I know Simplicius the thinker put forward the idea. Actually, it's not he's not the only one, but there are other like intelligence analysts that think it's even possible that this was choreographed by the Americans and the Iranians together because
I was
they
going
have
to
done that before. Right, because they did that. Remember with True Promise One. At least those are the reports. I think we got them. Like there was an article in the Financial Times just before it happened that they were working this out, and it certainly appeared to be what happened. Um, and then we've had, there was a similar incident in Syria, against a supposed chemical weapons lab or whatever, but it was clear they knew what was happening, that nobody got hurt. It was evacuated long before the attack, and many people believe that that was also choreographed. So it even could be, and if that's the case, yeah, then that may be it. It was something that was done for show on our side, and then it got the various neocons and the off of Trump's back, and he could declare victory and say that's it, we did it, we're the most awesome bombing mission of all time, whatever language that he uses. Yeah. So he might get away, even if it wasn't choreographed. I think it's possible, just for the reasons that we gave, that Iran sees it's not in their interest to pull the U.S. into this. And so they just may let him go.
right. Yeah, I mean, when I hear, JD Vance says, okay, our goal is the nuclear program, then you kind of think, okay, maybe they're looking for a way out. But then you see Trump tweet, maybe we should have regime change. And,
Yeah.
so it's just like, the messaging is
Yeah.
unclear. Like,
Yeah.
what is
Well,
the
I
goal
think that,
here?
yeah. Well, the messaging is always unclear when Trump is involved. I think, look at what everybody else is saying, and it's, okay, that was it. And then Trump starts to say other stuff and whatever, but it just, he's just never, not only does he not impose discipline on other people, he's not disciplined himself. He just he's just a very impulsive kind of person. So I think that was the official line, and that still is the policy. And we'll see if they can pull it off. But the other problem is, like, even if they don't retaliate in any significant way, and the U.S. Stays out of it for the time being, the thing is, if this turns into a true war of attrition and Iran starts to gain the upper hand, it's not clear that that's going to happen yet, but let's say if it does, and you see Israel just getting pummeled, day after day, then it's going to just be very, very hard for the U.S. not to intervene. I mean, here it was the pressure. The stated reason was the nuclear program. That was just, that was the argument that by and large, that the Israelis put forward, that Netanyahu was making, that he's been making for decades. By the way, we got to deprive Iran of any kind of nuclear capability, and so that now we say a mission accomplished. Okay, we've done it. That's it. But if over time again it looks like Israel is starting to lose this war, then the other arguments, the regime change arguments, and just the security of Israel, that's going to come to the fore, and Trump will find himself under the same kind of pressures or even greater pressure to become involved in on a larger scale to actually go to war against Iran.
Mm. Yeah, I had that thought as well, that potentially this could have been coordinated with the Iranians to give Trump a success, because it just seemed odd that they telegraphed this attack. Before this attack happened, we were discussing the attack on Fordo. It's like, okay, well, they're saying this is what it is, and could this potentially be misdirection? And then they went ahead and just did it. And I'm kind of, and so from my understanding as well, is that there's reports saying that these bases were emptied, that they were because they knew that they were the targets, that they removed any of the valuable enrichment materials or the uranium centrifuges already out. And I saw satellite images of trucks lining up at Fordo from days in the past. So do you think that's true, that we're getting two different stories? We have Trump saying that this was a complete mission success, we obliterated everything, and then you listen to people like Scott Ritter and said that minimal damage, anything of value was already evacuated. This was a big nothing burger. It's political theater. Where are you leaning?
Yeah, I guess I'm leaning towards. I wouldn't say I don't have any certainty. I don't think anybody, outside of the intelligence community, and even within the intelligence community, as far as the actual damage done, how can they really know? I think you actually have to send people, on the ground to do the inspection, actually to go underground to do the inspection. Otherwise, how can you know? You can make certain deductions from satellite photos, but that's it. But yeah, it seems to be clear. It's not just like Iranian sources, but even Israeli sources are saying that, yeah, the evidence is that they basically moved everything of value. Or certainly, the highly enriched uranium out of there, and it's somewhere else, and probably in some unknown location. And so, yeah, you can't say who knows how much damage was actually done down there. Um, According to some reports, 12 of these MOPs, the massive ordnance penetrators, were dropped on Fordo. That's quite a few. I mean, that's actually more than what I've heard. Now, other people are saying it was six. That's still a lot. And if you did it just right, theoretically, they could have destroyed everything down there. But we don't know. We don't know like what kind of, how, even how deep it really was, where there are different estimates. You hear 80 meters, 100 meters, but they say there may be some parts of the facility that are actually much deeper than that. And then we don't know what they did to reinforce them. Did they put in these deflecting structures under, in the ground above them, which would greatly reduce the effect of these MOPs. Um, so yeah, there's a big question about how much damage was really done. There's all kinds of speculation. Um, Trump is Trump. He's always going to say whatever he does is the most awesome thing that was ever done in the history of mankind. So, when I heard that, I just said, okay, well, that's Trump being Trump. He probably has no idea. Um, but yeah, I think there's no question that the place had been evacuated and the most valuable material in there had been removed earlier. As for those satellite photos, actually, Simplicius the thinker has a different interpretation of them. He says if you look closely that those were not actually cargo trucks that were removing materials, but they were dump trucks. And what they were doing was actually like filling in the entrances as a way of protecting them, just kind of creating so that these bombs can't actually fall down into these holes and into where they can do much more damage. They can penetrate more deeply, but they were actually plugging the holes to protect the underground facility. Now, I've only heard that from him, but that's what he says. So there's a there are a lot of question marks over this.
Mm. Something that I was thinking about as well is just the state of Iran's air defenses. I haven't even heard reports of Iran's air defenses even attempting to engage
Right,
these fighters that are flying over. So we had bombers plus an escort of fighters. Now we've also heard reports before that Israel is not flying directly over Iranian airspace or just over certain sections way far over in the west. But why do you think does Iranian air defense are they not able to engage in these types of fighters? Because it's we heard of F-35s and F-18s are having issues over Yemen. I
right,
figured there would be some type of engagement. I wasn't
right,
sure if they'd be able to take anything down, but it almost seemed like this was a way to say our American stealth tech is superior. It works. Look, they flew over and nothing happened. They just went in, couldn't get touched. Nobody even saw them, and they're right out. Is that really what happened? That they weren't even able to be seen or detected? And
well, maybe. Again, there is a theater possibility in which the Iranians let this happen. Okay, and the fact that there doesn't seem to have been any attempt kind of lends some support to that theory. I'll have to say. The other possibility is that the B-2 is quite an extraordinary machine, and its stealth capabilities are quite effective, right? And maybe they just weren't spotted. I think also they may have been flying at a very, very high altitude. Um, so, I don't know. I'm not sure if anybody really knows, aside from the people that flew these planes. There's even the theory that there weren't any B-2s. Again, this is all charade. I find that hard to believe, uh, but I'll just throw that out there. I don't know if it was the Iranians deliberately allowed them in, or they just were fooled. They said, by the technology, and then also by a certain misdirection that occurred ahead of time. I remember seeing the reports that B-2s had left, were flying over the Pacific. They had landed in Guam, and then they were continuing. And it looked like to a lot of people that those were the B-2s that were going to carry out the strikes. Apparently they weren't. And those were just there to deceive, were following that flight path in order to deceive the Iranians. Instead, the B-2s came from a different direction. They flew a total of 18 hours. They didn't actually just take off directly from Diego Garcia, which is one place where the Iranians might be focusing on. It came from a different direction. I don't know what it was exactly, but they flew 18 hours, and they were refueled several times in flight, and just took the Iranians by surprise. That's another explanation that's out there, but who knows? Again, we're kind of entering into this very murky world, where there's all kinds of, um, you get these stories, but it's just, you never know. Like I think the most recent one that I gave you came from Axios. Now, Axios is known to be closely connected to the CIA, and that's where they get a lot of their information. Now, some of the CIA information is good. They sometimes want to reveal what really happened, and they have it. They know the facts, and they provide them to Axios. But other times they feed them with false information, right? And so we don't know what's what.
Right? It's just this information war right now. It's so hard to know exactly what's going on. But this is what I'm afraid of. Okay, maybe this was a stunt, a political theater stunt, but I would say overall it's largely successful. I think many people here in the United States, it seems like, believe, okay, yeah, mission accomplished, we did it. American superiority is being reestablished. But and we can say, wow, we're so powerful, one and done. But the problem is, it's not. I don't think it's going to be one and done. It can't be, because Israel's going to continue to get hit. The more that Israel's getting hit, the more desperate they're going to say, America, you're not done. You got to get back in the ring here. And so, but if Iran is smart enough, and I believe they are, to not attack the U.S. bases outright, to just start a direct war with the United States, even though they have the right to retaliate, then what I'm afraid of is a false flag. That this is what is ripe for, is that Israel needs to draw on the United States. Iran won't do it. Then Israel needs to, attack one of these bases. There's also this talk about, beware of sleeper cells in the United States now that Iran's got all these agents. And it just makes sense. And I'm afraid it might actually work, because we attack them, and people here in America are celebrating we did a great job. Well, if something blows up in the United States, or one of these bases blows up, or a ship goes down, people are going to be, well, of course it's the Iranians. We just bombed them. There will be some people that will be speaking out and warning, like, this could be a false flag, could be a false flag. But I'm afraid that might work. And then all of a sudden, like, oh boy, here we go. It's the same, WMDs and 9/11. Just we're doing this whole horrific, catastrophic song and dance again. That's going to just lead it to unimaginable death and destruction.
Yeah. Well, yeah, false flag is certainly possible, but it may not be necessary. Again, it's just that if Israel starts to really get pummeled, and all the Israel firsters are going to start screaming, are going to start insisting. Yeah, some of them already are, on just on large scale intervention on the part of the U.S. They want the U.S. to go to war with Iran, and Trump has shown himself to be, pretty weak. He gets boxed in, and he eventually caves in, and I could see it happening. So they may, a false flag may not be necessary. Let's just put it that way.
Look, if we really go to war with Iran, there's so many ways that this thing could go. But I think there are a lot of things that could potentially shut down the United States without requiring a military confrontation, right? One of the things I think about is China dumping all this US debt and just crashing the dollar, right?
Mm-hmm.
There will come a point when great powers, if this war starts to expand, the US gets involved, that great powers will start to pull some levers to contain the United States. Don't you believe?
Yeah, well, I think so. I mean, that's the big question is like the extent of Russian and Chinese support. If they go all out in supporting Iran, then yeah, Israel is really in bad shape. I mean, it's going to look very, very bleak for Israel. And I think it's a possibility. In a way, why not? You see what the Western world has done, on behalf of Ukraine. It's not like they've kind of have tried to restrain themselves as far as supporting Ukraine. We've seen what's happened, right? It's not just that they're directly supplying with weapons. All their involvement is huge. Now the Russians and the Chinese don't have to go that far, but they could go a long ways towards supporting Iran. And why not? Really, why not? They should, because if if Iran falls, it's going to be a real blow to both of them, and I think they understand that. Again, right now the stated goal is not regime change, but it could easily. But there's questions about that. We have reasons to be doubtful that it isn't. Um, and certainly Russia and China would not like to see that happen. And again, Russia, though they don't have a mutual defense pact with Iran, which apparently they offered Iran, but Iran refused, incredibly. They do have this strategic partnership, and they don't want to see their strategic partner go down. So they can do a lot. They can provide offensive and defensive weapons to Iran. Both China and Russia can, and they can supply them through Pakistan, because Pakistan has shown a willingness to help out, and Pakistan is actually allied with China.
Well, that's scary because if the US is getting involved and all of a sudden there are maybe Chinese fighters or defense systems in Iran that shoot down a US plane or used to attack a US base, then is that how World War III starts? Like, how
Yeah,
big of a risk are
yeah.
we
I think
looking at?
they're gonna be careful to try to keep it below the level. At least as the U.S. in Ukraine, up until the actual lifting of the restrictions on the ATACMS, they were trying to not cross that red line, right? And I think probably both the Russians and Chinese would do the same. They would be involved on many different levels, providing them with intelligence, advisors, and above all, equipment. But but would be careful to avoid any direct conflict with Israel and the United States. So they could still do a lot, without going that far. Now, I'm
Right.
just wondering, there's also a question. I think I just heard, maybe it was a couple hours ago, that Iran actually has ended, or put a pause on its relationship with the IAEA. He said, we're not doing this anymore for obvious reasons, because it appears that the IAEA was actually complicit in this attack, which is a terrible um, which, if true, and it certainly appears to be true, is really a terrible blow to the NPT regime. Um, Now, I think both China and Russia do not want to see Iran actually get a nuclear weapon. It's just in the interest of maintaining the NPT. Even though it has been damaged greatly by the IAEA, they want to rebuild it. They want to, they don't want to see proliferation throughout the Middle East. So, but Iran has a real reason, for going after the nuclear weapon at this point. It's just obvious to anybody who looks at the situation. Hey, we tried to play by the rules. We did. We did play by the rules. It's not that we tried. We played by the rules. We were completely in compliance, and look what happened. We need to have a nuclear weapon. It's the only way to defend ourselves. And I can just speculate, but I think it's quite probable that Iran is making that case to China and Russia, and this actually gives Iran some leverage and say, we really need help, and if you can't help us, we're just going to have to go for a nuclear weapon. And maybe, if China or Russia was hesitant about supporting Iran, I think hearing that, they say, don't worry, we'll go, you don't have to go down that road because we've got your back. We're going to be helping you now in a very meaningful way.
Yeah, yeah. When I feel like the damage that has been done to the rules-based order, we talked about the IAEA being complicit in this, and we've just seen how all these institutions of the West have been used as tools of Western hegemony. Do you think that what we've done here was just so egregious to the concept of a rules-based international order that it's
Yeah,
irreparable? It's done,
yeah,
right?
it's done severe damage. It's not. I think like the whole notion of a rules. I haven't even heard it used recently, but the rules-based, international order. The whole concept is a joke now. I mean, everybody can see what's going on. It was already a joke before this attack by Israel, but now it's even more obviously so. I think if it was still standing, before the attack by Israel, it's no longer standing. I mean, it uh, doesn't have legs to stand on. It's gone. Um, but let's see, what was I going to say?
I mean, if it's gone, then Western hegemony is essentially over, right? So we're just sort of playing out the end game here and hoping that it doesn't go to World
Yeah.
War III.
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
it's
Well,
like,
this is, of course, we've talked about the three pillars of Western hegemony, and one of them is soft power. Western hegemonic soft power has been suffered, yet another blow, another very serious blow. I mean, one thing is just the absurdity of here. This is a country that has been complying with the NPT, has been subject to very extensive and intrusive IAEA inspections over the years, probably more than any other country in the world, that signed the JCPOA, and everybody admits, the Iranians kept their part of it. And even when the other side didn't, both the U.S. and the Europeans failed to remove the sanctions. That was their part of the deal. They just didn't do it. The Iranians kept it, and then even after, Trump tore up the deal, the Iranians continued to keep it another year, yeah, and just with the hope that somehow the U.S. would come back into it. So they've gone beyond, being compliant and being, truly abiding by the rules, of the so-called rules-based international order. And then here on the other side, of course, as we pointed out many times, there's Israel that has, this secret arsenal of nuclear weapons, isn't compliant, launched this completely unprovoked attack, and is attacking the nuclear facilities, war crimes, and it's supposed to be what the IAEA is supposed to, they're all about, is preventing these kind of things from happening, but it looks like they're complicit. So, I mean, the hypocrisy, the double standard is just so extreme that, yeah, it's just become a joke. And I think most of the world sees it very clearly. It just sees, yeah, these European leaders making these just outrageous statements. It's like, okay, now Iran has a chance to join, become a good member of the international community. And after all this, it's still Iran. Iran is the one that is the wayward child, and not Israel.
right? The hypocrisy is just staggering. So,
Right.
but does that? I mean, if everybody sees it, if everybody sees that the system that controls the world is just so engaging in such hypocrisy, then what? Then what does that mean? What is that? The world is just going to reject it, and we're going to see that people make fun of it, and then these systems start to crumble and collapse, and then a
Yeah.
new system goes into place. Broadly speaking,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Well, that's what we're seeing already. That's what we're seeing with the rise of BRICS and the realignment of a lot of countries that used to be solidly in the Western camp. and are now diversifying, let's say, their diplomatic relations, and they're looking to other partners. Again, like the Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states are an example. They used to be just completely, solid members of that Western or U.S. led hegemonic order, and no longer. They certainly have a foot within it. There's no question about it. They continue to have a fairly close relationship with the U.S., but they are now, they've made peace with Iran. They've been and are developing ties with both Russia and China. It's just everybody's kind of sees the way the world is going, I think, all around the world. And so you are, and this is just more another push that gives more impetus to that trend. And, it's just going to accelerate.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the U.S. actually does go to war with Iran. It's like, will the world allow it to happen? Like, as it starts to grow, people will have to take sides, and who will take the side of the United States? We talk about nuances all the time, but here we don't have a lot of nuance. We have a pretty black and white. We have a country, Israel, that engaged in a very devious attack. We compare it to Pearl Harbor, but this was even more devious because we were actively engaged in negotiations, and then we assassinate like the equivalent of Pete Hegseth, all these assassinations and these, like, it's not like we were just going, it wasn't a military base with just personnel. We were killing people in apartment buildings. It was so devious. It's like doing the Red Wedding in Game of Thrones, type of, I know you don't watch Game of Thrones, but people will get that reference. But but it's just crazy that, this is what we've done. And the world, they won't allow, if they have to take sides, people are going to side with Iran. Iran has become more popular than ever now.
Well, there's not only did they assassinate all these people, the generals and the nuclear scientists, and often killed many, many civilians in the process. They did kill many, many civilians in the process of doing that, as we saw Israel do in Lebanon. They also killed at least one of the lead negotiators. One of the guys that's sitting across the table from, I guess they were in different rooms, but negotiating with Steve Witkoff. It's so
and now
egregious. They're demanding they come back. It's just like, coming back and negotiate. Now we're asking Iran to come to the negotiating table. It's right. It's just that I don't know what it is. That there's just no self-reflection with it. What have you done? And, how can you expect anybody to ever trust you again? It's amazing that the Iranians trusted him as much as they did. I think they'd had their doubts, but there was this, this maybe a residue, just some bit of trust that hadn't been, totally destroyed by all the previous treachery. And so they still gave the negotiations a chance, and it appears that they're very foolish to have done so.
Yeah, I just can't think of a more clear good guy, bad guy type of scenario for the world to decide on. It's just
it is black and white. It's absolutely. And let's never forget, as this war rages, and it's got all our focus, the carnage, the horror in Gaza continues. It's just these massacres of aid seekers occur almost every day. Another 20 hungry people that are trying to get something to keep them alive get gunned down by the IDF. This is happening, virtually every day in Gaza. And nobody even notices it because they've gone on and they've attacked somebody else.
Right. Just in case you need a reminder of who the bad guys are, just look at what's happening in Gaza every day. These just people, starving people getting gunned down looking for food. It's just, it's crazy. So, if the U.S. does engage in a war, I'm just wondering, this is a war on the opposite side of the world for the United States, which also just goes to show how crazy that this whole thing is, that the United States somehow is thinking that this is existential for them, or that this is a huge threat to America. Is just so absurd. This is so crazy. And then will the U.S., how will we engage in this war? I don't think we haven't launched these attacks, like he said, from our bases in the Middle East. We're not using them because we know that it's just there's just sitting ducks, and no countries that are hosting these bases want us to use these bases because all of a sudden those countries will be complicit and under attack. So it's like, how do we even engage this war? Nobody wants to be on our side. No one wants to allow us to use their territories to launch attacks on Iran. So what do we expect, that we're going to be way out at sea? I mean, sure, this was an impressive feat, but I mean, how much did it cost to fly these B-2 bombers there and drop these bombs? How many of these bombs do we have? You know, is this what we're going to have to do? These very expensive, very far sorties that require air refueling constantly? Like, it just, it's not, I don't understand how we think that we would even be able to engage in a war with Iran fully. It just doesn't, the logistics just to pull off this one bombing feat, you know, was, I'm sure, was extensive. We can't maintain that level of operations daily. And then, of course, Iran has a say in the matter. They might start striking back. And you know, what it all comes down to, at the end of the day, it all comes down to Israel. They are in charge of the rate of escalation completely. And it all comes down to how much pain can Israel take. And we don't think they can take much. The more that pain that they're taking, the more that they'll start to panic. And the more they start to panic, the more pressure they're going to put on the United States to get involved. And the United States is probably going to have no choice. Well, we do have a choice, but our government, we know how they work, that they will step in line, Israel first. So that's what it comes down to. And unfortunately, Israel can't take a lot of pain. So we're going to see us go up the escalation ladder quickly.
I think there's a very good chance of it. You know, interestingly, there have been reports coming from Israel. Some of them contradicted by other reports, but it seems that that the majority of these reports indicate that Israel wants to bring this to a speedy conclusion. Like, I think I heard that, you know, according to Israel media, that the IDF is going to wind this down over the next few days, you know, maybe like within a week, and then say, okay, we've achieved our objectives, we bombed what we wanted to bomb, and then that's that. So if so, and that's an indication that Israel really does want to pull out of this, that things maybe are not going according to plan. But of course, you know, Iran has a say in this. Yeah, you know, you started this fight. You don't get just declare, after doing, you know, assassinating all these people and causing all this destruction, that you can't just walk away from this. You know, we're going to keep on fighting. And like, it's not, you know, again, there are a lot of questions. It's just like, we don't know. There have been, many have argued, you know, have suggested that Iran is suffering, you know, a shortage of launchers, and that has prevented them from, you know, firing as many missiles as they would like to, and that's why we're seeing these smaller strikes. You know, instead of 150, you know, you're seeing maybe 20 missiles sent. And still, you know, several of these missiles get through and do some serious damage. So other people say, no, that's part of the plan. Iran is just in this for the long haul. So they just decided to, you know, kind of slow down the tempo, and they're just going to keep on going. We'll see. You know, again, there's just this fog of war. We hear all this, there's all this information and misinformation and speculation. That's the big question, is really, well, I guess there's two big questions, like especially on the Iranian side. Do they have a sufficient number of launchers? How many missiles do they have? We don't know. You know, we've been told that they had these very sophisticated missiles, and I think indeed we see that they do have those missiles. I think that question has been answered. But how many? You know, you heard thousands, tens of thousands, you know, maybe 150,000 when you include or more when you include the short range and the medium range missiles. But we don't know. We really don't know. So there's a question over the quantity they have. There's a question mark over the number of launchers they have. That could be a real bottleneck. And then there's also the air defense. It seems like the air defense really, you know, isn't as strong as we thought it was. It may have been that it really suffered some serious damage during that initial surprise attack. You know, all the drones that were launched from actually within Iranian territory did a lot of damage to the air defense system. Or maybe it was never quite as strong as we thought it was. It should have been stronger. You know, one thing we've learned actually from Putin directly was that he offered to help them build up their air defense system. And they apparently said no, which, which is really surprising to me. I think all of us assumed that the Russians were helping them to build up the air defense system, and maybe they didn't. And that seems to have been a serious mistake on their part. Why is that? Again, I've heard different stories. I think one possibility is just Iranian pride. They strongly value their independence. They want to do it on their own. But I think you got to accept help, when you're dealing with enemies like Israel and the United States. So anyway, that's on the Iranian side. We just really don't know exactly like the state of their air defense. In general, it seems like Israeli planes have kept out of Iranian airspace. I saw some reports, unconfirmed, that there were planes flying over Tehran, just like in the last 12 hours or so. I'm not sure if that's true or not. If it is, that would be a disturbing development. Um, but on the Israeli side, it's just, again, Israel is so much smaller, again, than and fragile in some ways than Iran is. That Iran, even if it is suffering grievous blows, as long as it can send out some missiles, like even every other day, Israel is going to be in a real fix. Their main port in Haifa, as you know, is partially shut down. Maersk, one of the largest international shipping lines, it says we're not going there anymore. The Ben Gurion airport has been shut down. I heard it's going to be partially reopened, but I don't think there's a chance that you're not going to get any of the um, airliners from outside of Israel going there. Uh, so it's just like, as long as like every few days Iran lobs a missile towards Haifa or towards Ben Gurion, it's just that Israel is in a fix. I'm sure they've already suffered very grievous economic damage. And this constant, they have suffered a minimal number of casualties, in spite of all the damage that's been done, because they do have a very good um, sheltering system, air raid shelters. And they do get their people down there. Now, I've heard it's a lot better for Jewish Israelis than it is for Arab Israelis. That's one thing. I think there were a number of actually Arab Israelis that were killed because they didn't have a shelter to go to. It hadn't been built for their town. Um, so anyway, but constantly having going down those shelters, that again, just over time, it's going to wear a country down. It affects their economy. And this is a economy that's highly dependent on trade um, and tourism and so on and so forth. And that this is going to so again, Iran, even if it is sort of on the ropes, as long as it can land the occasional punch, it's Israel is going to be in real trouble.
Okay, so you think that as it's in real trouble, Israel is going to try to push for a ceasefire. Of course, though, whenever there's a ceasefire that Israel agrees to, it's like, okay, you guys stop shooting, but we can kind of do what we want. We saw that in Lebanon, we saw that in
Right.
Gaza. Do you think that there's actually a chance that Iran would agree to some type of ceasefire? Only if maybe they really don't have the missiles for perhaps to
Right.
engage in something like
Yeah,
this.
there's a chance, and that's right. I just I raised these questions about Iran's Iran's military capabilities, and if the answer is that Iran is in serious trouble, it lacks the launchers or whatever, the air defense system really needs to be rebuilt. They might go for it, and it might make sense. It's just like, okay, yeah, we were caught off guard. We suffered this. We made the mistake of not working with the Russians to build up our air defense system. Okay, let's let them have their ceasefire, and we'll correct these mistakes, and we'll just be in a much stronger position when they attack again, because we can expect that they will. So that's a possibility. But yeah, if they feel that they actually have the Israelis on the ropes, that they in fact are not in danger of running out of missiles or launchers, that they have, maybe it's a weakened air defense system, but it's sufficient to keep, most aircraft out of their airspace. Uh, the incentive will be to continue. We'll see.
What's the situation like domestically for both these countries? If you look at Western media, it sounds like they're ready to rise up and get their rights back and it's an overthrow, and
Yeah, everybody says, without exception, people across the political spectrum in Iran, that Iran has never been more unified. Again, all the people that were just uh, that were passionate opponents of the regime are have actually rallied to its support. And even some of these people, there's this Iranian expat community in the U.S. that tends to be very, very anti Islamic Republic, and they want to see the Shah's son put in power and all that. But even I was just hearing from one of them is saying that that like all our this has been a terrible turn of events for us. It's just like there was dissent in Iran. There was opposition, but that has evaporated, and it's actually just kind of like uh, it has ended basically. The opposition movement within Iran, and it's made the opposition movement outside of Iran just completely toothless at this point. People are very, very strongly unified, and they're angry. They're very, very angry, and they want to fight.
I don't think Trump got that memo. He
Yeah,
seems to think that maybe.
yeah.
Well, what about? So this is another thing that maybe potentially could help end this conflict. Is if there's something that changes domestically within Israel, as this pain rises for Israel, and their economy is at a standstill. I hear power plants that have been blown up, like they're having to go just to having to run into your shelter. Any type of daily life, running your economy
Right,
is just put to a stop. Like,
right.
who's showing up to work now? So how much if this continues to go on, I imagine that there's going to be a lot of people pointing the finger at Benjamin Netanyahu and said, "You did this to us. You destroyed Israel." And will there be some type of revolt?
Well, okay, there's a potential for that. At the present time, no. There actually has been a kind of a rallying around the flag within Israel. And when it comes to the question of Iran, the Israelis in general trust their government. They trust the IDF, and even the opponents, of Netanyahu, of which there are many. Probably is a majority of the population would like to see him go, but the majority is actually strongly on the side of this attack at this point. But that may change over time. We see that happen a lot in wars. It's just like there's always this surge in popular support for one's own government when the war begins, but if it goes poorly, over time that ebbs away, and then people become increasingly angry. And I think that's what you would see, in Israel. Well, in large part because this was clearly a war of choice. For the Iranians, it's different. This is not something that we asked for, our government asked for. This is something you did to us. And so people are willing to understand. They suffer, and they understand why they have to suffer. They're suffering because of Israel. It's not because of their own government. But if, it goes on in Israel, you'd have to say, did this have to happen? This was something, the Iranians never did this to us until we attacked them. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea. And so that opposition to Netanyahu that was so powerful prior to the launch of this war could very easily reconstitute itself, and Netanyahu could be pushed out, and maybe that could at least lead to a ceasefire. If that happens. I don't think there's any sign that that's going to happen soon. This has been successful. A lot of us have wondered if maybe that's the true motivation for this war. I think it's at least a part of it. Again, this did get, let's say, get Netanyahu out of some real political hot water. He was in danger of losing control of his coalition and having to face a new election. He was, that close to it before this war began.
Do you think if there was a ceasefire in Israel right now that Israel could survive, or has the damage been so extensive in Israel that they may not be able to recover already?
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to do permanent damage to him. I don't think it means that Israel is going to collapse. It's going to continue to be subsidized by the U.S. and protected by the U.S. But it's not the same Israel. I think that was already true, after the Gaza horror began, and that people looked at that, and that has already changed the perceptions of Israel among many, many people. And then what this did again is it just it really put an end to the myth of Israeli invincibility. So even if it stops and Israel's still standing, there are blocks that have been wiped out in places like Tel Aviv. There was some real damage done, and we've never seen that before. We just haven't. And again, it's just that affects the long-term perception people have of Israel. People that maybe were looking to invest in Israel, people that were thinking about immigrating to Israel. I mean, I guess you'll find the zealots maybe will say, I need to go to Israel. But the people who don't share their zealotry are going to choose not to immigrate, or they're going to leave Israel. So I think it's just it's done permanent damage, and it's probably just going to accelerate, the trends that we've seen, towards increasing isolation, and also towards increasing extremism within the country. And again, those people that are still reasonable are likely to leave, and the ones that are going to stay are the extremists, and that'll strengthen, the support for the Smotriches and the Ben Gavirs.
Which just means more war.
Yeah. Yeah, it does, unfortunately, but it also means increasing isolation, less support for Israel. And one of these days, that I think that will extend to the U.S. Again, it's just that you look at the polls of what younger Americans think about Israel, and it's that unquestioning support has already evaporated among them.
Right. What do you think is going to happen here domestically if Trump continues, to get more involved in Iran? Is this I mean, this should be an impeachable offense, right? I mean, we have some people like Thomas Massey, Marjorie Taylor Greene that are speaking out against it, but
yeah.
it's strange. We will impeach Trump for, not, what was it? It's not sending enough weapons to Ukraine or delaying something.
The whole thing is entirely bogus, right?
But here he actually launches an attack on Iran, and he probably will get impeached for it.
Yeah. I have to say, I'm not a big fan of hers, but OAC had proposed that, impeachment proceedings against Trump. And then also it has to be said that with that, it was that measure that was put before the House by Thomas Massey, and then who was the co-sponsor? Well, I think there are now a number of co-sponsors. Thomas Massey is the only Republican co-sponsor, and now there are something like 20 Democratic co-sponsors. This was on, insisting that, now it's moot, basically, but it insists that President Trump, receive authorization from Congress before he launches, any attack on Iran.
Right, just basically obeying the law that already exists on the table.
Right. Acting according to the Constitution. So anyway, so you find actually there is some opposition, on those grounds. Now, interestingly, you just don't find anybody, even OAC, really talking about the malignant influence of the Israel lobby. And you are getting some talk about that, on the right side of the aisle. So Thomas Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene are saying, this is wrong. We should be, this clearly is something that's done for Israel and not being done for our own interests. And this shouldn't happen, right? But again, they are a minority. But I think their argument, actually the argument that both the Democrats, are putting forward about constitutional restrictions on the actions of the president, and about the undue influence of the Israel lobby that is being put forward by at least some people on the Republican side, will resonate with a lot of the public. Because again, I just saw a poll, I think, right before we started this podcast, that showed that support for this military action, when you look at polls taken prior to previous military actions, you find that I think in the case of the Iraq War, it was something like, oh no, Afghanistan, it was like 88% or something in favor of attacking Afghanistan. And then it was a little bit lower, but still very, very high for Iraq. But this was way down there. We're talking like, what was it, 23%? It was well below water. And a very considerable, well, not a considerable majority, but a majority were definitely opposed to it. So this is different. I mean, Trump went into this with minimal support, and unlike previous presidents. Now, if he can just end it, with this most awesome bombing run of all time or whatever, he'll do fine. And actually, I think he'll receive a boost. But if it does turn into one of these forever wars, I'd say he's in real trouble. I mean, it's just like, again, there wasn't the popular support for it. I think there was the cynicism. Again, we heard all the talk about, we're just hearing the talk about weapons of mass destruction all over again. And I think a lot of people are saying, look, we're hearing this again. I'm sick of this. One of the reasons that I voted for Trump was that he said this wasn't going to happen, and it's happened. So it could turn sour. I think at this point it hasn't, but it could very well turn sour for Trump.
Do you think that America and much of the world is undergoing some kind of great awakening and understanding this relationship between Israel and the United States is something that is truly wrong? Something is not correct here. This is an unholy relationship. The undue influence that Israel has over a country when it comes to foreign policy. It's just so many things within our government. Do you think that cat is out of the bag? We're seeing some pushback against, and people are really starting to question it. And then that's just sort of a silver lining of this whole unfolding disaster.
Yeah, it's there. It's mostly among the young. It's still, on the fringes. The establishment is still firmly on the side of Zionism, and really Zionism, which is now taking a very extreme form. And that's not just true in the U.S., but it's true in Western Europe. But the gap is such between perceptions among the general publics in these country and the policies of the establishment that I think those establishment policies are unsustainable in the long term. It's just a question of when, not if, there's going to be a change.
Mm-hmm. It's so there's so many things that could happen now. It's so hard to just look at this, right. Because it's like, what is Iran going to do? Or, are they going to build nukes? Are they going to retaliate? Is there going to be a false flag? What's Israel going to do? What's the United States going to do? What's Pakistan, China, Russia? There's just so many unknowns here. And it is, I'm always going down these different paths of like how this could potentially play out. And it just feels like 99% of the time it ends out bad. And then I'm hoping I'm wrong, that maybe there's a way we can just navigate out of this whole mess without, the use of nuclear weapons, or without widening regional conflict, potential World War III. But when I go down all these paths, at the end of the day, it all just comes down to Israel, and the fact that Israel, as long as it, keeps on getting hurt, and it will continue to put pressure on the United States, and this war is just going to happen. I feel like that's, at the end of the day, the issue, and it's just not going to work out well. We can speculate how China is going to get involved, Russia, but it just, it feels weird. We're at this stage where we committed this act of war against Iran, and now we're just kind of sitting around waiting. And I don't feel as panicked as I think maybe I should, because I know where this is heading. It's just kind of sitting around waiting, before this thing sets off. Is that how you're feeling it?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we're at a very uncertain moment in this whole thing. It could go in different directions. It depends on not just on the realities on the ground, of which our understanding is necessarily limited, and choices that will be made in in Tel Aviv and in Tehran. And I think if you look at Washington D.C., obviously we're looking at Trump, and that's. I think we can predict that that he will just keep on going down this road.
Yeah.
I believe, maybe I'm wrong, and this whole thing was just a ruse to begin with, but I believe that he did actually want to pursue a negotiation track. But he got pressured off of that. He got talked into the Israeli attack, and then he got talked into this attack. And, he said, again, is this going to be sweet and clean as one off and he'll be a great hero? And right now it's looking pretty good for him. But for the reasons that we've talked about, the pressure will start to be on him to take the next step and to expand the attack, to openly push for regime change. And when that, we just see that it seems like when push comes to shove, Trump gives in and goes ahead. He listens to all the neocons and the Israel firsters that are around, that he's surrounded himself with. Let's be honest about that.
Okay, well, I guess we just have to buckle up and get ready for this ride. Anything else you want to say, Dad, or good for the day?
Yeah, again, it's just the war continues in Gaza, the war continues in Ukraine. One worrying development that at some point we need to talk about is just the increasingly really dangerous and reckless rhetoric that you're getting from European countries and about possibly seizing Russian ships in international waters. And of course, we saw there was one attempt of the Russians, I think, scared off. I can't remember which of the three Baltic countries did it attempt to actually seize a Russian ship, but the Russians sent fighter planes and their naval vessel there and prevented that from happening. But that talk continues. Now the Russians are actually starting to form convoys, they have naval vessels protecting fleets of oil tankers. They've actually been doing that for a while within the Baltic Sea, where clearly they're most vulnerable. But I heard just recently they did it through the English Channel as well. So it would be a huge escalation if, for example, the British Navy attempted to seize a Russian oil tanker, and it could, it's something that the Russians would almost be forced to respond to very forcefully, because this would be a true act of war. I mean, something shutting down their access to the Baltic, and from the Baltic into the Atlantic, is something that they just cannot accept. I mean, this has been an important part of let's say Russian geopolitics and economy, is just this access to the sea, to the Atlantic through the Baltic Sea, for centuries. And it's something that has been regarded as vital by the Russians for centuries. So if the Europeans go down this route, we're going to look at a potential for a very serious and scary escalation in the Ukraine war.
Okay, well, great. Another thing to worry about. It's getting crazier out there, Dad. Every year, every day now seems to be just getting a little bit crazier. Okay, let's just end it there. Okay. Stay safe out there, everybody. Have a good rest of your day, Dad. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.